So for number 5, we have a function that asks us to unscramble the following lines to complete the body of is complete meal. And it says that you will use each line exactly once. So we have these lines, and we have to fill in the blanks as well as reorder them in our code for is complete meal. So is complete meal takes in a list of 3 elements containing food items, and it returns true if the 3 food items make a complete meal, meaning that it has one from each category of appetizer, main, and dessert. And it can be in any order, so there's no particular order. And it returns false if the meal is incomplete. Alright, so whenever I see a question that asks me to fill the following function or write code for it, I like to look at the dog test. So here we can see that we start with an appetizer list, a main list, a dessert list, and we have a meal. So this meal has bread, salad, and ice cream. Notice that bread belongs to the appetizer list, salad belongs to the appetizer list as well, and ice cream belongs to the dessert list. And so this meal is missing a main, and therefore it's not actually a complete meal. The function returns false for it. And on the other hand, we have another meal that has bread, steak, and ice cream, and is complete meal returns true because it has one app, one main, and a dessert. Alright, so what we're going to start off with is by looking at these lines of code and seeing how we could fill in the lines. So I noticed that the first line is has a variable called hasApp, and in general, as like a sort of tip, if you ever see a variable that starts with has, like for example, like I don't know, has list or has permission or something like that, it's usually going to be a Boolean because whether you have something or not is going to be true or false. For example, I have homework due this week, or I don't have homework due this week. So that's always true or false. And thus, this signals to me that hasApp should be a Boolean value. So we want to set it to false in the beginning because whether the meal has an appetizer or not is not yet determined. So we haven't seen any items in the meal yet, and therefore hasApp is still false. But after going through all the items, we can change this to true later on, because then we have seen an appetizer or something like that. Okay, so we can also do this for dessert and main equals false. And I'm just going to transfer these lines of code down here. And remember that you can always define multiple variables in one line. So I'm just going to do that. And notice that these variable names are pretty helpful. So if you take a look at them and just try to think how they would fit in the code, you can find that they kind of give it away what they should be for just because of the name. So has dessert will indicate that we have seen a dessert in the meal, and yeah. Okay, so now we have our Boolean variables, and now we need to go through every item in the meal. So I'm going to look out for some kind of loop here, and we can see that this line has 4 in it. So I want this to look something like for item in meal, so I'll fill in with that. and write it down here for item in meal. Now what I want to do is check each item to see if it's an appetizer, a main, a dessert, or none of those three. So first I'm going to fill in this if statement, see if item in apps, which is the list of appetizers, and then I can also say elif item in mains, and elif item in desserts. So these are going to be our three cases for the three categories. So if item in apps that means the item is an appetizer. So I want to set has app to be true because we have just seen an appetizer. So I'm going to fill this in to be true. Write it down here. Has app is true. Then elif item in mains has main equals true. And finally, elif item in desserts has dessert equals true. Okay, so let's just take a look at what we have so far. So we have these three Boolean variables that help us keep track of whether we've seen an appetizer, a main, and a dessert. And then we're going to go through every item in the meal and check if it's in one of the three lists. And if it's in one of the lists, then we set that particular Boolean value to be true for that list. So now let's ask ourselves, what does it mean to be a complete meal? Well, it has to have one item from each category. And that means all of these Boolean values should be true, because then that way we know we have an appetizer, a main, and dessert. So it's hitting all three categories, which is great. So that means we can set this return value to just check for us whether or not all of these Boolean values are true. And I'm just going to write has app equals true here. But notice that if I actually take this away, equals true, it still serves the same function, because has app is always going to be a Boolean if you define it this way. Is Boolean. And so saying a Boolean is equal true is quite redundant, because this Boolean will always be either true or false. And when we say like Boolean and Boolean, well, it's just going to evaluate on these true and false values that the Boolean can take on. So saying has app equals true is the same thing as saying has app, because it's always going to be either true or false, and it's a condition on its own. Alright, so we can also continue and say has main and has dessert. Okay, and then at the very end we're going to write this has app and has main and has dessert. Okay, and remember from our Boolean rules that all three of these have to be true in order for the whole statement to be true. That's exactly what we want, because we want all of them to be satisfied, not just one condition. And just to reiterate about this point, in case it was kind of confusing, if you have a Boolean value, that can act as a condition on its own. But let's say, for example, we have a variable called x, and it was equal to 5, like an integer. Well, we can't just say, like, we can't compare 5 to true, right, like directly. We have to set, like, maybe 5 equals 5, and then this becomes a Boolean. Okay, so that's what I mean by has app is a condition on its own. And the same thing goes for has main and has dessert. But it's totally fine, and we won't mark you down if you say equals true here. It's just a little bit redundant. But totally doesn't hurt, and if you want to be safe, go for it. Just put it because it's the same meaning.